meant to exist. Not the reverent quiet of warriors at rest, but something far more terrible. The kind of silence that screams of absence, of loss so profound it echoes through adamantium and ceramite, like a wound that will never heal. You wake to this silence, and in that first moment of consciousness, returning after decades or perhaps centuries of darkness, you reach out through the neural networks that connect the sepulchres, searching for the familiar presences of your fellow ancients. Brother Cassius, who fought at Istvan and remembered the face of the emperor. Sister Morgana, whose tactical acumen had saved 3 worlds from corruption. Ancient Thaddeus, whose dry humor could still make the Vox speakers crackle with something approaching laughter, even after 8,000 years of war. But there is nothing. The network is empty. The other sarcophagi stand cold and silent, their life support systems powered down permanently, their occupants granted the final rest that you have been denied. You are alone. You are the last dreadnought in your chapter, the final ancient of a brotherhood that once counted dozens of your kind, among its honored dead who refused to die. And in that realization, in that moment, when the full weight of this terrible distinction settles upon the remnants of your consciousness, you understand that you have become something more than a warrior entombed in a walking tomb. You have become the last keeper of 10,000 years of memory, the final witness to battles that shaped the galaxy, the sole repository of wisdom that will die with you when you finally fall. The tech marines who perform your activation move with practiced efficiency, but you can sense the difference in how they approach your sarcophagus. There is a reverence there that borders on desperation. You are not just another ancient to be awakened for battle. You are the last, and in a chapter slowly dying from 1,000 wounds, you represent something they cannot afford to lose. Every diagnostic reading is checked 3 times. Every seal is inspected with microscopic precision. They whisper prayers to the machine god and the emperor with unusual fervor, as if they know that when you march to war, you carry with you the last living connection to everything their chapter once was. And perhaps they are right to be afraid, because you remember. You remember when the halls of the fortress monastery rang with the voices of 10,000 warriors, when every company was at full strength, when the gene seed vaults overflowed with the legacy of heroes. You remember the chapter at its height, glorious and terrible, a force that made even the forces of chaos recoil in terror. But you also remember the slow decline, the catastrophic battles that claimed hundreds of brothers at a time, the gene seed that was lost or corrupted, the recruiting worlds that fell to Xenos invasion or were swallowed by warp storms. You remember it all, every moment of glory and every step of the descent into this twilight existence, where your chapter clings to survival by its fingertips. The weight of being the last ancient is not merely the weight of memory, though that burden alone would crush a lesser being. It is the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that when you fall, and there are no more like you to take your place, something irreplaceable will be lost. The young Marines who now make up the bulk of your chapter's remaining strength have never known the old ways, never heard the stories as they were meant to be told, never understood the depths of the brotherhood that once defined your kind. They see you as a relic, a weapon to be deployed when all else fails, a walking shrine to be revered from a distance. But they cannot comprehend what you have lost, what the chapter has lost, in the silencing of those other voices that once spoke alongside yours in the darkness between battles. This is what it means to be the last dreadnought in your chapter. This is the burden you carry with every thunderous step across the battlefield, with every moment of consciousness stolen from the merciful darkness of stasis sleep. You are memory made flesh and steel. You are history walking. You are the final guardian of everything your chapter was, even as you watch it become something else entirely, something diminished and desperate and fighting for survival against odds that would have been unthinkable in the days of your chapter's glory. The nature of the cage. To understand what it means to be the last ancient, you must first understand what it means to be a dreadnought at all. The transformation is not an honor, no matter what the chaplains proclaim over your broken body as they prepare you for entombment. It is a sentence, a condemnation to a half-life that stretches across centuries, while everything you were slowly erodes into something that can barely remember being human. The process begins in agony and ends in a darkness so profound that madness becomes not a risk, but an inevitability that you fight against with every fragment of will you possess. When a space marine is mortally wounded beyond even the incredible recuperative abilities of the gene seed and the arts of the apothecaries, a choice must be made. Death would be merciful. Death would grant the warrior his final rest, allow his gene seed to be harvested and passed on to create new brothers. Let his name be inscribed in the rolls of honor and his sacrifice be remembered with pride. But if that warrior is deemed worthy, if his experience and wisdom are judged too valuable to lose, then mercy is denied. Instead, what remains of his shattered body is rushed to the fortress monastery's deepest vaults, where the tech marines and apothecaries work their dark miracle of preservation. The surgery is brutal beyond description. What flesh remains is carved away with surgical precision. Organs that cannot be saved are removed. Limbs that served faithfully for decades or centuries are severed without ceremony. Pain suppressors can only do so much, and even a space marine's enhanced ability to endure suffering has its limits. The procedure itself has been known to kill those whose bodies were too damaged or whose minds could not withstand the horror of what was being done to them. But for those who survive, for those whose consciousness persists through the butchery and the cutting and the systematic destruction of everything they were, something worse than death awaits. The sarcophagus is both womb and tomb, a coffin lined with amniotic fluids and life support systems. It contains what remains of the warrior. A torso, perhaps. A head, certainly, for the brain must be preserved. Sometimes an arm or portions of the spine if they can be salvaged. The rest is machinery, neural links driven into the nervous system like roots seeking purchase in dead soil. The mind impulse unit connects directly to the brain, creating a cybernetic bond that allows the entombed warrior to control the massive frame of the dreadnought as if it were his own body. But it is not his body. It will never be his body. Every sense he once possessed is replaced by mechanical simulacra that transmit data rather than sensation. Vision becomes Auspex readings and tactical displays. Hearing is reduced to acoustic sensors that pass sound waves into digestible information. Touch, that most fundamental of human senses, is gone entirely, replaced by pressure readings and structural integrity monitors. The dreadnought pilot sees the world through optical sensors mounted in the armored head that sits atop the towering frame. He hears through mechanical ears that can detect enemy movements across kilometers, but cannot truly appreciate the sound of rain falling on ceramite plating. He exists in a state of profound sensory deprivation, cut off from the physical world in ways that no amount of technology can truly bridge. The psychological toll is immense. Between battles, dreadnoughts are placed in stasis sleep, a state of suspended animation that can last for decades or even centuries. This is not done merely to preserve the ancient technology, though that is certainly a consideration. It is done because keeping a dreadnought pilot conscious for extended periods inevitably leads to madness. The isolation, the sensory deprivation, the slow realization that you are more machine than man, it all combines to break even the strongest mind. Some pilots go feral, like Murderfang of the Space Wolves, consumed by uncontrollable rage that makes them dangerous to enemy and ally alike. Others retreat so far into themselves that they become little more than automata, executing commands with mechanical precision, but no longer possessing anything that could be called personality or will. The lucky ones, warriors like Bjorn the Fell-Handed, maintain some semblance of their humanity across millennia of service. But even they admit to the crushing loneliness, the sense of being adrift in time, while the world moves on without them. Bjorn has served for over 10,000 years, has witnessed the entirety of the Imperium's history since the Horus Heresy, has spoken with heroes whose names are now legend. But he also acknowledges that the price of this longevity is profound. Every time he wakes, there are fewer who remember the world as it was. Every time he sleeps, he loses a little more of what made him who he was. The memories remain, stored in the organic portions of his brain and the databanks of his sarcophagus. But they become more like history lessons than lived experiences. The emotional context fades. The faces blur. The voices that once meant everything become whispers in the darkness. This is the reality of being a dreadnought. You are a consciousness trapped in a machine, granted a form of immortality that is indistinguishable from damnation. You serve your chapter because that is all you have left, because without purpose, you would drown in the existential horror of your existence. And when your chapter has many dreadnoughts, when the sacred halls hold dozens of sarcophagi, and you can commune with other ancients during those rare moments of wakefulness, there is at least some comfort in shared suffering. You are not alone in your torment. Others understand what you endure. Others can remember with you, can validate that you were once more than this shell of ceramite and adamantium. But when you are the last, when all the other sarcophagi have fallen silent, and you wake to find yourself utterly alone in your mechanical imprisonment, the cage becomes so much smaller. The darkness between battles becomes absolute, and the question that haunts every waking moment is no longer how long you can endure, but whether there is any point in enduring at all. The sacred halls of the dead who cannot die. Within every Space Marine Fortress monastery, there exists a place that is part shrine, part armory, and part mausoleum. The sacred halls where the dreadnoughts sleep between battles are places of profound reverence, tended by tech marines with ritualistic care and visited by battle brothers seeking wisdom or simply paying respects to the chapter's honored dead. These halls are vast echoing spaces, usually deep within the fortress monastery's lowest levels, where row upon row of sarcophagi stand in silent vigil. Each one is a monument to a warrior who gave everything for the chapter and now serves beyond death itself. The atmosphere in these halls is unlike anywhere else in the fortress monastery, where the chapels ring with hymns and the training grounds echo with the sounds of combat. The halls of the dreadnoughts are places of quiet contemplation. The air itself feels heavy with history and loss. Servitors move among the sarcophagi with mechanical precision, performing maintenance tasks that have been unchanged for millennia. Tech marines in their red-painted armor murmur prayers to the machine god as they anoint each dormant walker with sacred oils and unguents, checking systems and ensuring that the ancient warriors within remain stable in their dreamless sleep. Each dreadnought is marked with the honors it has earned across centuries or millennia of service. Battle honors are inscribed on the armor plating, campaigns listed in High Gothic that chronicle wars fought on worlds whose names have been forgotten by everyone except those who still sleep here. Purity seals dangle from weapon mounts and armor joints, each one a prayer or blessing added after some great victory. The chapter's icon is prominently displayed, often alongside the personal heraldry of the warrior within, a reminder that beneath the machines and weapons, there was once a man who had a name and a story. For the battle brothers who visit these halls, the dreadnoughts represent something almost sacred. They are living connections to the chapter's past, warriors who fought alongside the founders or participated in battles that have become legend. Young Space Marines come here to pay their respects, to stand before these towering sarcophagi and contemplate the sacrifice required to continue serving even in death. Veterans come to seek counsel, for when a dreadnought is awakened, its wisdom is considered invaluable. And chaplains come to tend to the spiritual health of warriors whose faith must sustain them through an existence that would break lesser beings. The rituals surrounding the dreadnoughts are ancient and precise. When one must be awakened for battle, The process begins with prayers and incantations. The tech marines perform the necessary mechanical preparations, bringing systems online with practiced care, but always accompanied by the chaplains who speak the words that have been spoken since the chapter's founding. The awakening is treated as a resurrection of sorts, a return from the realm of death to fight once more for the Emperor and the chapter. And when the battle is done, when the dreadnought returns to the halls for its return to stasis, the rituals are equally elaborate. Blessings are spoken, oils are applied, and the warrior within is thanked for its service before being returned to its dreamless sleep. But imagine these halls now, when all the other sarcophagi stand cold and empty. The rows that once held dozens of ancients now contain only one that still lives. The ritual maintenance continues, for the tech marines still tend to the empty shells with the same devotion they showed when warriors slept within them. But it is different now. The weight of absence is palpable. Where once there was a community of sorts, a brotherhood of the entombed who could at least take comfort in numbers, now there is only singular isolation. When you wake in these halls as the last dreadnought, the silence is crushing. You remember when this place hummed with the quiet power of dozens of life support systems, when the neural network that connected all the sarcophagi buzzed with occasional communications between the sleeping ancients. You remember ancient Matthias, who occupied the sarcophagus to your left, sharing observations about the chapter's newest recruits. You remember Venerable Cassia, whose sarcophagus stood at the head of the hall, who had fought in the founding battles and whose memory stretched back further than anyone else's. You remember the sense of not being alone, of being part of something larger than your individual torment. Now there is only you. The other sarcophagi are maintained as shrines, yes, but they are empty. Their occupants fell in battle over the decades and centuries, their shells too damaged to preserve them, their final deaths bringing the peace that had been denied them for so long. Each one you remember, each loss you mourned in whatever way a dreadnought can mourn, with processes that are more mechanical than emotional, but no less real for that. And now, looking around the sacred halls, during those brief moments between awakening and deployment, you see only emptiness. Only the monuments to warriors who are truly gone, whose service has finally ended. The tech marines and chaplains still perform their duties with reverence. They still speak the ancient words and apply the sacred oils. But you can sense their grief in the way they move, in the pauses that stretch too long during the rituals. They are mourning not just the fallen dreadnoughts, but what those deaths represent. The slow extinction of the chapter's living history. You are all that remains of that connection to the past. When you fall, and fall you inevitably will, there will be no more ancients to awaken. The sacred halls will become truly silent, a museum of empty shells that once housed heroes. And so you stand in these halls, this last ancient among empty tombs, and you carry the weight of all those who fell before you. Their memories live on in your databanks. Their lessons inform your tactical decisions. Their sacrifice drives you to continue fighting, even when every moment of consciousness is agony. The sacred halls are your home and your prison, your sanctuary and your torment. And being the last one here, the sole occupant of a place meant to house many, makes the cage so much smaller and the darkness so much deeper than it was ever meant to be. The slow erosion of the self. The human mind was never meant to endure what a dreadnought pilot experiences. Even a space marine's genetically enhanced psychology, even the hypno-indoctrination and mental conditioning that makes them resistant to horrors that would shatter mortal sanity, has limits. And those limits are tested to their breaking point when consciousness is stretched across centuries or millennia, while trapped in a metal shell, cut off from nearly all physical sensation, awakened only for war, and then returned to a darkness so complete it borders on non-existence. The first few awakenings are the hardest in some ways. You are still close enough to who you were to remember what it felt like to be fully human, or at least fully Astartes. You remember the weight of a bolter in hands that no longer exist. You remember the sensation of your boots striking solid ground with each step, the feeling of wind against your face during a drop pod descent, the taste of recaf in the moments before battle. These memories are vivid and immediate, and their loss is a grief that cannot be adequately expressed through the mechanical vox speakers that serve as your voice. During these early awakenings, you rage against your imprisonment. You test the limits of your new form, trying to find some way to experience the world as you once did. But the mind impulse unit translates your commands into machine movements, and the sensory inputs you receive are data, nothing more. The optical sensors show you the battlefield with perfect clarity, highlight enemies with targeting solutions, overlay tactical information directly into your field of view. But they cannot show you beauty. They cannot let you appreciate the way light falls across a landscape or the subtle expressions on a human face. You see everything and perceive nothing in the way you remember perception working. You try to speak and hear your voice rendered in mechanical approximation, a crackling synthesis that sounds nothing like you remember. Some dreadnoughts develop quirks in their vocalization systems over time, the technical irregularities in how their speech is rendered, grinding static that might be laughter, or the cycling of weapon systems that occurs when they would have smiled. But these are pale shadows of human expression, machine translations of emotions that can barely be felt through the layers of mechanical mediation. And so, gradually, you begin to let go, not by choice, but because holding on hurts too much. The memories of what it felt like to be flesh and blood start to fade, not because they are erased, but because accessing them brings such profound pain that your mind learns to avoid them. They become like old scars, remnants of wounds that have healed but left permanent marks. You know they are there. You can examine them if you choose, but doing so serves no purpose except to remind you of everything you have lost. Time becomes strange when you spend most of your existence in stasis sleep. You wake, fight, and sleep again, and each period of consciousness might be separated from the last by months or years or decades. The continuity of experience that defines human consciousness begins to break down. Events blur together. Battles fought centuries apart merge in your memory, because from your perspective, they might as well have been consecutive. You lose track of how long you have existed in this state. The chapter's chroniclers can tell you that you have served for 600 years or 3,000 years, but those numbers mean nothing to you. Time is measured only in awakenings, in the number of times you have returned from the darkness to fight once more. The erosion of memory is insidious. The tech marines and apothecaries do what they can to preserve your cognitive function, adjusting the chemical balance of your amniotic tank, fine-tuning the neural interfaces, running diagnostic tests to ensure that the organic portions of your brain remain viable. But even with all their efforts, decay is inevitable. The human brain, even one enhanced by Space Marine gene seed, was not meant to function for thousands of years. Neurons die and are not replaced. Synaptic connections weaken. The biological substrate upon which your consciousness depends slowly degrades, despite all attempts to preserve it. You begin to forget things. Small details at first. The exact wording of oaths you once knew by heart. The faces of battle brothers you fought alongside in your first life as a flesh and blood warrior. The name of the world where you were recruited. These losses are small individually, but they accumulate. And worse than the factual memories you lose are the emotional memories, the context that makes experiences meaningful rather than mere data points. You know you fought at the siege of Carantha. Your data banks contain detailed tactical information about the battle. But do you remember how you felt during that siege? Do you remember the fear and exhilaration and grim determination that drove you through 8 days of continuous combat? Those emotional memories fade first, leaving you with facts but no feeling, history without heart. Some dreadnought pilots fight against this erosion. They create rituals to help preserve their memories, force themselves to recall their past during the brief periods of wakefulness. They ask the chapter's librarians to interview them, to record their stories, while they can still tell them with something approaching their original meaning. They struggle to hold on to their humanity, to remain more than just sophisticated weapon systems guided by tactical programming. Others let go. They embrace the transformation into something post-human, something that exists purely for war without the burden of remembering why or caring about the cost. These pilots become cold and efficient, perfect warriors, unburdened by doubt or fear or any emotion that might compromise their function. They are revered for their effectiveness, but mourned by those who remember that they were once men, not machines. For Chaos Dreadnoughts, this psychological decay takes an even darker turn. Without the rigorous mental conditioning and spiritual support of a loyal chapter, and exposed to the corrupting influence of the warp, many Chaos pilots descend into complete madness. They are kept shackled between battles, screaming incoherently through their Vox speakers, driven to such extremes of insanity that they become dangerous to their own forces. Their existence is a living hell made worse by the touch of chaos, their torment eternal and absolute. The traitor legions use internment in a dreadnought as punishment rather than honor, a fate worse than death for those who have displeased their dark masters. But even among loyal chapters, even with all the support and reverence and careful maintenance, the psychological toll remains immense. And when you are the last dreadnought in your chapter, when there are no others who truly understand what you endure, the erosion of self accelerates. You have no peers with whom to share the burden, no other ancients who remember how you were before entombment and can help you hold on to those memories. The young battle brothers try their best, but they cannot comprehend what it is like to experience consciousness through mechanical proxies, to measure your existence in millennia, while your personality slowly dissolves like morning frost under a rising sun. You are forgetting who you were. Not all at once, but piece by piece, memory by memory, feeling by feeling. And the truly terrifying part is that you know it is happening, can track your own decline with the same analytical precision you apply to battlefield tactics. You are becoming less human, less individual, less everything except a weapon pointed at the chapter's enemies. And there is nothing you can do to stop it, except endure for as long as consciousness persists and try to serve your chapter well before the final darkness claims what remains of your mind. The weight of living memory. You remember the founding of your chapter, not directly perhaps, for even the oldest dreadnoughts were not there at the very beginning. But you remember warriors who were there, who spoke of the chapter's first days before they fell in battle, or were finally granted the peace of true death. You remember the stories they told, the lessons they passed down, the traditions they established that defined what your chapter was meant to be. And now, with all those other ancients fallen silent, you are the only one who carries those memories forward. This is perhaps the cruelest burden of being the last dreadnought. You have become the chapter's living chronicle, the sole repository of knowledge and wisdom accumulated over millennia of warfare. Young battle brothers come to you seeking guidance, asking questions about tactics and strategy that were proven in battles fought before their grandfathers were recruited. They want to know about the chapter's greatest victories, its most bitter defeats, the lessons learned in blood on battlefields, whose names exist now only in fragmentary records and your failing memory. And you try to teach them. You access data files that contain tactical reports from campaigns fought centuries ago. You describe the terrain of worlds that have since been destroyed or abandoned, the tactics employed against enemies long since extinct. You share the wisdom of battle brothers whose names are inscribed in the chapter's rolls of honor, but whose actual deeds have been forgotten by everyone except you. You are their teacher, their historian, their connection to a past that grows more distant with each passing year. But the weight of this responsibility is crushing. Every question reminds you of how much has been lost, how many stories died with the ancients who fell before you. Ancient Cassius knew the truth behind the chapter's founding, the political machinations that led to its creation, and the secret shame that drove its first company master to seek redemption through service. But Cassius fell 300 years ago, and with him went those secrets. You know they existed, have fragments of conversations that hint at deeper truths, but the full story is gone forever. Sister Morgana carried memories of the chapter's greatest shame, a battle where cowardice cost the lives of an entire company and nearly resulted in the chapter being declared excommunicate traitoris. She knew what really happened, who made the decisions that led to disaster, and how the chapter had worked for 1,000 years to atone for that single failure. But Morgana's sarcophagus was destroyed in an ambush 60 years ago, crushed by a Chaos Titan's foot, while she held the line long enough for the surviving battle brothers to escape. With her death went the complete truth of that ancient shame. You have pieces, fragments preserved in your own databanks from conversations with her, but you cannot tell the full story, cannot pass down the lessons she meant to preserve. This is the tragedy of being the last ancient. You hold more history than anyone else in the chapter, more accumulated wisdom and experience. But you also know how much you do not know, how many gaps exist in the chronicle you are supposed to preserve. The other dreadnoughts held pieces of the puzzle that you never learned before they fell. And now those pieces are gone, lost in the destruction of their sarcophagi, irretrievable. The chapter's librarians do their best to preserve what you share. They record your words, compile your tactical analyses, create archives that future generations can study. But they know, and you know, that something essential is being lost in translation. The dry facts make it into the records. Dates, forced dispositions, outcomes. But the context, the emotional weight of those events, the subtle lessons that can only be understood by someone who was there, those things cannot be adequately captured in written form. You remember how it felt to fight beside the chapter's founder, to serve under a leader whose vision shaped everything your chapter became. You remember the sound of his voice, the way he could inspire warriors to impossible acts of heroism with just a few words. You remember the look in his eyes during the chapter's first major battle, that mixture of pride and fear and absolute determination. But how do you convey that to battle brothers who never knew him? How do you make them understand what was lost when he fell, how the chapter changed after his death? You try, speaking through your mechanical vox speakers about intangible qualities and subtle shifts in culture. But your words sound hollow even to your own auditory senses. You are describing colors to those who have never seen, trying to capture in data what can only be truly understood through experience. The weight grows heavier with each passing year. More of your chapter's history lives only in your memory banks and nowhere else. More critical knowledge depends on your continued survival. The chapter's leadership knows this, understands that you represent an irreplaceable resource. They are careful about deploying you, weighing the tactical advantage of your participation against the catastrophic loss that would result if you were destroyed. But this caution creates its own burden. You were made for war, have known nothing but battle for centuries or millennia. Being held in reserve, awakened only for the most desperate situations, feels like a betrayal of your purpose. You want to fight, to serve, to justify your continued existence through action. But you are too valuable to risk needlessly. And so you become a living museum piece, a relic to be protected, rather than a warrior to be deployed. The young battle brothers revere you, but also keep their distance, treating you more like a shrine than a brother. They cannot understand that beneath the ceramite and adamantium, within the amniotic tank that houses what remains of your body, there was once a warrior like them. Someone who felt fear and pride and the fierce joy of combat. Someone who was human, or as close to human as a space marine can be. You try to bridge that gap, to connect with the chapter's current warriors in meaningful ways, but the distance is too great. They look at you and see a monument to the chapter's glorious past, a walking embodiment of traditions they strive to uphold. You look at them and see how different they are from the brothers you remember, how the chapter has changed in ways both subtle and profound. The gene seed they carry is the same, yes, but the culture has shifted. The traditions have evolved. The chapter they serve is related to the one you remember, but not identical to it. This disconnect is perhaps most painful when you try to share wisdom that was once central to the chapter's identity, only to find that it no longer resonates. Tactics that were proven effective 1,000 years ago may not work against the enemies the chapter faces now. Values that once defined the chapter's character have been modified or abandoned in response to changing circumstances. You are a guardian of the past, trying to guide a present that has moved beyond what you knew, trying to prepare warriors for a future you cannot fully comprehend. And yet, you persist, because this is your duty, perhaps the only duty that still holds meaning. You are the memory keeper, the last living link to everything your chapter was. When the battle brothers gather to hear you speak of old wars and older heroes, you know that you are giving them something precious, even if its full value cannot be measured. You are connecting them to their lineage, to the brotherhood that stretches back through generations of warriors, all the way to the chapter's founding. You are reminding them that they are part of something larger than themselves, heir to a tradition of sacrifice and service that has endured for millennia. But the weight of it all, the responsibility of being the sole bearer of so much history, it grinds you down in ways that combat never could. Every awakening brings the fear that this time you will have forgotten something crucial, that some critical piece of wisdom will have slipped away during your sleep, lost to the degradation of your organic components, or simply buried under the weight of accumulated centuries. You review your databanks compulsively during periods of consciousness, checking to ensure that the stories are still there, that the lessons remain intact. But you know it is a losing battle. Time and biology are eroding your capacity to remember, even as your chapter's need for your memories grows more desperate. You are the last ancient, the final keeper of living memory in a chapter that is slowly forgetting who it was meant to be. And you carry that weight with every thunderous step, with every moment of consciousness between the darkness and the light, knowing that when you fall, so much will be lost that can never be recovered. Brothers, falling silent. You did not always wake alone. There was a time, so long ago, it feels like another life entirely, when the neural network that connected the dreadnought sarcophagi hummed with quiet conversation. The exchanges were brief, for energy must be conserved during periods between battles, but they were enough. Enough to know that you were not alone in this existence, that others endured the same torment and could understand without explanation what it meant to be trapped in a walking tomb. Ancient Theron was the first to fall silent, though you did not know it immediately. His sarcophagus stood at the far end of the sacred halls, and he had always been taciturn even before entombment. Weeks might pass between his communications, so when the network showed his presence but received no response to queries, you assumed he was simply conserving power or lost in whatever passed for dreams in the mechanical slumber. It was only when the tech marines performed their routine maintenance that they discovered his life support had failed catastrophically during an extended deployment. His organic components had died silently, unnoticed, while the dreadnought's systems continued to function on automated protocols. He had fought his final battle already dead, his body preserved by the amniotic fluids just long enough for the engagement to conclude before decay became evident. The chapter gave Theron the funeral rites appropriate for a warrior who had served for nearly 4,000 years. His gene seed had long since been harvested, of course, but the shell of his dreadnought was interred with full honors in the chapter's mausoleum. You attended, your massive frame barely fitting in the ceremonial chamber, and listened to the chaplain speak of Theron's service and sacrifice. But the words felt hollow. Theron had died alone inside his metal cage, and none of you had known until it was too late to even acknowledge his passing. That realization haunted you for decades afterward. Sister Cassia fell in battle, which was perhaps a better death than Theron's silent ending. The campaign was against a Tyranid splinter fleet that had emerged from the void to consume a cluster of agricultural worlds. Cassia had volunteered for the rearguard action. had stood her ground while the remaining Imperial forces evacuated the last of the civilian population. The Vox channels carried her final words, a defiant challenge to the alien swarm, even as they overwhelmed her position. When the relief force finally managed to fight their way back to her location 3 days later, they found her dreadnought buried under a mountain of alien corpses, her assault cannon still smoking from continuous fire, her sarcophagus breached by bioacid and crushing claws. The chapter recovered what they could of her remains for proper burial rites. You attended that ceremony as well, stood in the sacred halls as her empty sarcophagus was sealed permanently and placed among the monuments to fallen heroes. The Tech Marines spoke the prayers for the machine spirits, and the chaplain spoke the prayers for her soul. But you knew the truth that they could not articulate. Cassia had finally been granted the peace that had been denied her for 3,000 years. She was free now, in a way that you would never be as long as consciousness persisted. The losses accumulated slowly at first. Ancient Carthon destroyed in an orbital bombardment that leveled an entire hive city. Brother Mordecai consumed by warp fire during a battle against Chaos forces, his screams echoing through the Vox network until his systems finally failed. Sister Elara, whose sarcophagus was captured by Dark Eldar raiders and presumably still exists somewhere in the dark city of Camorra, enduring torments that make your own existence seem merciful by comparison. Each loss diminished the community of ancients, reduced the number of voices that could speak to the unique horror of dreadnought existence. You mourned them in the way a dreadnought mourns, which is to say, you processed their deaths as data points, even as something that might have been grief echoed through the organic portions of your brain. You archived their final communications, preserved their tactical insights in your databanks, carried forward the lessons they had shared during those long periods of darkness when the ancients would commune with each other through the neural network. Their deaths meant you had to remember more, carry more weight, preserve more of the chapter's living history, because there were fewer left to share the burden. But the real horror came when you woke one day to find yourself truly alone. The other sarcophagi in the sacred halls stood cold and dark, their occupants all fallen in battles you had slept through. How long had you been in stasis? The Tech Marines' reports indicated 73 years had passed since your last awakening. 73 years during which the chapter had fought desperate campaign after desperate campaign, deploying its remaining dreadnoughts in battles where their presence was judged essential to survival. And one by one, those ancient warriors had fallen. Ancient Matthias during the defense of the fortress monastery against an orc War. Venerable Sarath in a boarding action against Chaos Raiders. Brother Ancient Dawn on a world whose name you cannot even remember now, though his sacrifice bought time for 2 companies to escape encirclement. 73 years. You had slept through the deaths of every other ancient in your chapter. You had not been there to hear their final words or witness their last stands. You had not been awakened to pay respects at their funeral rites. You were simply gone, lost in the darkness of stasis sleep. And when you returned, everyone you had known for centuries or millennia was dead. The neural network that had once carried occasional communications from fellow dreadnoughts now showed only your own presence, a single point of consciousness surrounded by empty connections and silence. The Tech Marines who performed your activation could barely meet your optical sensors. They knew what you were waking to, understood the magnitude of the loss, even if they could not truly comprehend what it meant to you. The chaplain who attended your awakening spoke words of comfort, assured you that the fallen ancients had died with honor and that their sacrifice would not be forgotten. But his words were hollow. How could they not be? He was 3 centuries old, had fought in 24 campaigns, was considered a veteran by the chapter's current standards. But you had served for over 7,000 years. You had known warriors whose deeds made the chaplain's accomplishments look like training exercises. You had lived through the chapter's greatest triumphs and darkest hours. And now, you were alone in a way that even the isolation of dreadnought existence had never prepared you for. The absence is not merely a matter of losing comrades. It is the loss of the only beings in the galaxy who truly understood your existence. The other ancients knew what it meant to wake from centuries of darkness, to find the world changed beyond recognition. They understood the horror of sensory deprivation and the slow erosion of identity that came with mechanical entombment. They could validate your experiences, could confirm that you were not going mad when memories began to blur and personality began to fragment. They were your community, the only one you had in an existence defined by isolation. And now they are gone. All of them. Every single ancient who might have understood what you endure, who might have shared the burden of living memory, who might have made the darkness between battles a little less absolute. You are the last, and that distinction transforms your existence from torment into something approaching damnation. You request the reports of their deaths, read through the tactical summaries and casualty assessments with the same analytical precision you bring to all data analysis. But you are looking for something the reports cannot capture, some indication of what they felt in those final moments, whether they found peace or died still raging against the dying of the light. The reports give you facts, dates, forced dispositions, the tactical situations that led to each ancient's deployment and subsequent death. But they cannot tell you what you need to know. Whether your fellow ancients are finally at rest, or whether some fragment of consciousness persists even in death, trapped in whatever lies beyond, for beings who were never meant to exist as long as you have. The sacred halls feel different now. The tech marines still perform their maintenance rituals, still anoint the empty sarcophagi with sacred oils and whisper prayers to machine spirits that no longer have organic components to protect. But it is all theater now, a performance of rituals that have lost their original meaning. The halls were meant to house living warriors, not empty monuments. They were meant to be a place where ancients could rest between battles, knowing that when they woke, others like them would be there. But you wake to silence. You wake to the knowledge that when you are returned to stasis after the coming battle, you will sleep alone in these halls with only the empty shells of dead warriors for company. And when you wake again, assuming you survive whatever conflict requires your presence, you will wake alone again. There is no comfort in this, no consolation in the fact that at least you still serve. Because service without community, duty without fellowship, is a special kind of torment that even the architects of the Dreadnought program never fully anticipated. You are the last ancient, and you have never been more alone than you are in this moment, standing in the sacred halls, surrounded by the monuments to warriors who at least found the peace of true death, while you continue to endure in this half-life that stretches toward infinity with no end in sight. The tactical burden of irreplaceability. The chapter master's face is grim as he briefs you on the coming battle. An Orc Waa has descended on one of the chapter's recruiting worlds, and the greenskin horde must be stopped before it can overrun the tribal populations that provide the chapter with new aspirants. The tactical situation is desperate. The chapter can field perhaps 300 battle brothers, all that remain from campaigns that have slowly ground down its strength over the past century. Against them, an estimated 50,000 orcs, growing larger every day as more arrive to join the War. In the old days, this is where the chapter would deploy its dreadnoughts. Ancient warriors whose experience and firepower could turn the tide of battle, whose presence would inspire the battle brothers to impossible acts of heroism. The chapter once had 12 dreadnoughts, veterans of campaigns stretching back to the founding. Any 3 of them could have broken the orc advance, could have carved through the greenskin horde like a power blade through flesh. But now, there is only you, and the chapter master's reluctance to deploy you is evident in every word of his briefing. He outlines the tactical plan, describes the defensive positions the chapter will hold, explains the strategy for buying time until reinforcements from a neighboring chapter can arrive. And through it all, he avoids stating the obvious. Without you, the defense will likely fail. But if you fall, If the orcs manage to destroy your sarcophagus, the chapter loses not just its last dreadnought, but its last living link to everything it was. You understand his dilemma. You are simultaneously the chapter's greatest tactical asset and its most irreplaceable resource. Deploying you risks everything. Not deploying you risks defeat. There is no good choice, only a calculation of which loss the chapter can better afford. And that calculation has become the defining tension of your existence as the last ancient. The chapter needs you, not just for your combat capabilities, though those are significant. A dreadnought is a walking fortress, heavily armed and armored, capable of taking punishment that would destroy lesser vehicles and continuing to fight. Your assault cannon can shred infantry formations. Your power fist can tear apart enemy armor with contemptuous ease. In the right position, you can hold a choke point against forces that would overwhelm multiple tactical squads. You are, in pure tactical terms, worth dozens of battle brothers. But you are also something the chapter cannot replace. If a battle brother falls, his gene seed can be harvested and used to create a new warrior. His death, while tragic, is not catastrophic. The chapter continues. But if you fall, there are no more dreadnoughts to take your place. The sacred halls become a museum of empty shells. The chapter loses its living memory, its connection to the past, its deepest repository of tactical and strategic wisdom. Your death would be a wound from which the chapter might never recover, even if it survived as an organization. This creates impossible choices. The Battle Brothers need your presence to have any hope of victory, but your presence puts you at risk. The chapter needs the worlds you defend to survive, needs the recruits those worlds provide, needs the strategic resources they represent. But it also needs you, and weighing one need against another becomes an exercise in grim mathematics that has no right answer. You have seen the toll this calculation takes on the chapter's leadership. The chapter master ages visibly from the stress of making these decisions. The chaplains pray for guidance with unusual fervor. The captains argue among themselves about when deployment of the last ancient is justified and when it represents an unacceptable risk. And you, trapped in your sarcophagus, watch these debates knowing that you are both the subject and the solution, the warrior they need and the relic they cannot afford to lose. There are battles where you could make a difference but are held in reserve because the risk is judged too great. You listen to the Vox channels as your battle brothers fight and die against odds you could have shifted in their favor. You hear the calls for support, the desperate requests for heavy weapons that you could provide. And you remain in the sacred halls, confined to your sarcophagus, forced to endure the knowledge that your brothers are dying while you are preserved like some precious artifact, too valuable to risk in actual combat. The guilt is crushing. You were made for war, have served in combat for millennia. Being held back while others fight violates every instinct you possess. You want to demand deployment, to insist that the chapter use you as you were meant to be used. But you also understand the logic that keeps you in reserve. You are the last. Your death would be final in a way that even a catastrophic defeat would not be. The chapter could survive losing 100 battle brothers. It could not survive losing you. And so you endure, confined to the fortress monastery while battles rage on distant worlds. You provide counsel to officers who come seeking your tactical expertise. Share what wisdom you can about fighting enemies you have faced across millennia of warfare. But it is not enough. It will never be enough. Because the knowledge you provide, the strategies you suggest, they are abstractions. They lack the weight of your actual presence on the battlefield, the terror you inspire in enemies who see a walking monument to the Imperium's ancient might bearing down on them. When you are deployed, when the situation becomes so desperate that the risk must be accepted, the weight of responsibility becomes almost unbearable. You are not just fighting for victory in a single engagement. You are fighting to justify your continued existence, to prove that the chapter's decision to deploy you was correct. Every shot must count. Every tactical decision must be sound. Because if you fail, if you do not achieve the decisive results that warrant the risk of deploying you, then you have failed not just yourself, but the memory of every ancient who fell before you. And yet, despite the pressure, despite the weight of expectation and the knowledge that you cannot afford to fail, you fight with the precision and efficiency that centuries of combat have ingrained in you. Your assault cannon tears through enemy formations with measured bursts. Your power fist crushes armor and pulps flesh with mechanical ruthlessness. You advance with inexorable purpose, a walking embodiment of the chapter's fury, and the enemies before you break and flee because they understand, on some instinctive level, that nothing they possess can stop you. The battles you fight are victories, almost always, because the chapter only deploys you when victory is essential, when defeat would be catastrophic, when every other option has been exhausted. And you deliver. Again and again, you deliver. You stand where others would fall, hold lines that others would abandon, break enemy forces that others could not damage. You are everything the chapter needs you to be, the ancient warrior risen from the past to save the present. But each battle brings you closer to the end. Each engagement risks the final death that has claimed all the other ancients. Each time you march to war, you carry the knowledge that this might be the last time, that this battle might be the one where the enemy gets lucky, or you make a mistake, or the sheer weight of firepower directed at you overcomes even your adamantium armor. And if that happens, if you fall, the chapter loses everything you represent. This is the burden of irreplaceability. You are too valuable to risk, too essential to hold back. You exist in a state of constant tension between deployment and preservation, needed everywhere but confined to nowhere. And as the last dreadnought in your chapter, as the final ancient in a brotherhood that once numbered dozens, the weight of this burden grows heavier with every passing year. The dying chapter. You can see the end coming. It is there in the casualty reports that stack higher with each campaign. It is there in the shrinking recruitment numbers from worlds that are themselves dying or abandoned. It is there in the fortress monasteries' emptying halls, in the companies that can barely muster half strength, in the gene seed vaults that grow emptier with each harvest that cannot be replaced. Your chapter is dying. Not quickly, not in some catastrophic battle that will be remembered in the Imperium's records, but slowly, inexorably, bled dry by 1,000 cuts across 1,000 worlds. And you, the last ancient, watch this slow-motion extinction with the analytical detachment that comes from having witnessed the deaths of everything you once knew. The signs were there long before the last of the other dreadnoughts fell. Recruitment shortfalls that grew worse with each generation, gene seed degradation that the apothecaries could not fully arrest despite their best efforts, combat losses that exceeded replacement rates year after year, decade after decade. The chapter was in decline, even when you had brothers ancient to share the burden of watching it happen. But now, as the sole witness to this twilight, the decline feels more absolute, more final. The fortress monastery itself reflects the chapter's diminished state. Entire sections stand empty, sealed off to conserve power and heating. The great halls that once echoed with the voices of 1,000 battle brothers now hold perhaps 300 souls, and their voices sound small and lost in spaces meant for far greater numbers. The armory still maintains the chapter's equipment with religious devotion, but there are fewer suits of power armor to maintain, fewer vehicles to service, fewer weapons to consecrate. The chapter's fleet has been reduced to a handful of ships. The strike cruiser that serves as the chapter's mobile base shows signs of age and wear that would have been unthinkable in the days of the chapter's strength. The tech marines do what they can with limited resources, performing repairs that are increasingly improvised and temporary. But there are systems that cannot be fixed without parts that no longer exist, technologies that cannot be restored without knowledge that was lost when Mars fell out of contact with this sector. Most telling of all are the gene seed vaults. The chapter's apothecaries maintain them with fanatical care, for the gene seed represents the chapter's future and its past. But the vaults are depleted in ways that no amount of care can remedy. Too many battles have resulted in the complete destruction of battle brothers, their gene seed lost beyond any hope of recovery. Too many of the recovered progenoids show signs of degradation, mutations that make them unsuitable for implantation. The chapter harvests what it can from the fallen, but the mathematics are merciless. The rate of gene seed loss exceeds the rate of recovery. The apothecaries could request additional gene seed from the Adeptus Mechanicus vaults on Mars, could petition for the resources needed to rebuild the chapter to full strength. But such requests would draw scrutiny, would invite inspection by the Inquisition, and potentially by other chapters who might question whether this dying chapter deserves to continue existing. There is pride involved, certainly, a refusal to admit the depths of the chapter's decline, but there is also pragmatism. A chapter that admits it is failing risks being declared excommunicate traitoris, or simply being absorbed into another chapter, its identity lost, its traditions abandoned. And so the chapter fights on, maintaining the fiction of its continued viability, even as the reality becomes increasingly desperate. Companies are reorganized to hide their depleted numbers. Battle honors are claimed for victories won at costs that would have been considered catastrophic in earlier times. The chapter master makes diplomatic overtures to neighboring chapters, seeking alliances that might provide support without requiring admission of weakness. You watch all of this with the accumulated wisdom of millennia, and you understand what the chapter's current leadership cannot fully grasp. This is how chapters die. Not in glorious last stands remembered for 10,000 years, but in slow attrition that erodes strength until nothing remains but empty halls and unfulfilled obligations. Your chapter is following a path that you have seen before, that you remember other chapters walking in your long centuries of service. And the end of that path is always the same. There are choices the chapter could make to arrest the decline. It could seek refuge in less dangerous sectors, husband its strength, focus on rebuilding rather than constant combat. But such choices feel like betrayals of the chapter's identity and purpose. Your chapter was founded to defend this sector of space, to stand against the enemies of mankind in this particular corner of the galaxy. To abandon that duty, even temporarily, even in the name of survival, would be to admit that the chapter has failed its fundamental purpose. And so the chapter continues to answer every call to battle, continues to deploy to war zones that stretch its capabilities to breaking point, because that is what Space Marines do. That is what the chapter has always done. And changing that pattern, even in the face of extinction, feels impossible to warriors who have been conditioned to know no other way of existence. You try to offer counsel, to suggest strategies that might preserve the chapter's strength while still fulfilling its obligations. But your advice is filtered through the perspective of someone who has endured for millennia, who has seen chapters rise and fall, who understands that survival sometimes requires flexibility that younger warriors interpret as cowardice. Your suggestions are heard with respect, certainly, for you are the last ancient, and your wisdom cannot be dismissed lightly, but they are rarely acted upon. The chapter's leadership believes, perhaps needs to believe, that the solution to their problems is more combat, more victories, more demonstrations of the chapter's continued relevance and capability, and each battle brings them closer to the end. Companies that sortie at half strength return at a third. Gene seed that might have been recovered is lost when entire squads are consumed by tyrannid swarms or obliterated by orbital bombardment. The recruiting worlds that provide new aspirants are themselves under increasing pressure, their populations declining, their ability to produce suitable candidates diminishing. You are watching your chapter die, and you cannot stop it. You can only bear witness, preserve what memories you can, and continue to fight when called upon, knowing that each battle might be the last for the chapter you have served across the ages. The weight of this knowledge is staggering. You are not just the last ancient, you are potentially the last witness to your chapter's existence, the final keeper of traditions and memories that will die with you when you finally fall. The younger battle brothers do not cannot understand the full magnitude of what is being lost. They know the chapter is struggling, certainly. They see the empty barracks and the depleted armory, but they lack the perspective to recognize the pattern, to understand that they are living through their chapter's final decades, or perhaps final years. They fight with the same courage and dedication that has always defined Space Marines, but they do so without realizing that their sacrifices are feeding a decline that cannot be reversed through individual heroism alone. And you, trapped in your sarcophagus, can do nothing but endure and remember. Remember what the chapter was when it stood at full strength, when its companies numbered 1,000 warriors, when its gene seed vaults overflowed with the legacy of heroes. Remember the battles fought and won, the world saved, the enemies crushed beneath the weight of the chapter's fury. Remember it all, knowing that soon there will be no one left to remember, that the chapter's history will become just another footnote in Imperium's vast and largely forgotten chronicle. This is what it means to be the last ancient in a dying chapter, to watch everything you have served for millennia slowly crumble into dust while you endure, powerless to prevent it, burdened with memories that will die with you when the darkness finally claims what remains of your consciousness. The unbearable isolation. Isolation has always been part of the Dreadnaught's existence. From the moment of entombment, you are separated from the world by layers of machinery and sensory mediation. You perceive reality through optical sensors and acoustic detectors, experience the world as data rather than sensation. Even in the presence of your battle brothers, you are fundamentally alone, unable to truly connect with warriors who still possess flesh and blood bodies, who can still feel the wind on their faces and taste food and experience all the small physical pleasures that make existence bearable. But there was always the network. The neural connections that linked the Dreadnought sarcophagi allowed for communication between the ancients during the long periods of darkness between battles. The exchanges were minimal, necessarily brief to conserve power, but they were enough. Enough to know that others endured the same existence. Enough to share observations about the chapter's current state or reminisce about battles fought centuries ago. Enough to not feel completely alone in the mechanical tomb that served as both prison and home. Ancient Theron had a way of describing the tactical situation on any world in terms of geological features, comparing defensive positions to mountain ranges and troop movements to rivers flowing across terrain. His metaphors were sometimes obscure, but they carried an elegance that made them memorable. You would argue with him sometimes about the appropriateness of comparing orc tactics to erosion patterns, and those arguments helped pass the time during extended deployments when you were awakened but not yet committed to battle. Sister Morgana collected stories, not just battle reports or tactical analyses, but the personal narratives of individual warriors. She would ask the battle brothers who came to pay respects in the sacred halls about their lives, their hopes, their fears. And then she would share those stories through the network, creating a tapestry of human experience that helped the ancients remember what it had been like to be fully human. Her death silenced those stories, left a gap in the network that could never be filled. Brother Ancient Matthias had served longer than any of you, except perhaps Cassius, and his perspective was shaped by millennia of watching the Imperium change. He had fought in the Plague Wars, had witnessed the opening of the Great Rift, had seen the return of the Primarch Guilliman. His commentary on the chapter's current struggles was always measured against the vast sweep of history he had witnessed, and that perspective was invaluable for maintaining morale during difficult times. All of them are gone now. All those voices that made the darkness between battles bearable have been silenced, and you are left alone in a way that even the original isolation of entombment never prepared you for. The network still functions, technically. The neural connections remain intact, the systems operational. But there is no one to connect to, no voices to fill the silence, no presence, except your own consciousness floating in the darkness. The younger battle brothers try to bridge the gap. They come to the sacred halls to pay their respects, to seek your counsel, to simply be in your presence. They mean well, and you appreciate their efforts, but they cannot understand what you need, cannot provide the companionship that only another ancient could offer. They speak to you with reverence, treat you like a shrine or a monument, maintain the proper distance between themselves and something they view as sacred. But you do not want reverence. You want conversation. You want someone who can understand when you reference battles fought 3,000 years ago, who can appreciate the nuances of tactics that were proven in wars they have only read about in the chapter's archives. You want someone who knows what it is like to wake from centuries of darkness to find the world utterly changed, who understands the horror of sensory deprivation and the slow erosion of identity that comes with mechanical existence. The chaplains come regularly to tend to your spiritual health, performing rituals and speaking prayers meant to sustain your faith and purpose. But even they cannot truly reach you. They speak of the Emperor's plan and the glory of service and the honor of sacrifice. All words you have heard 10,000 times, all sentiments you understand intellectually, but can no longer feel with any depth. The chaplains are doing their duty, and you respect that. But they are speaking to a consciousness that has become so alien through centuries of entombment that their words sound like they are directed at someone else entirely. The tech marines who maintain your systems are perhaps the closest thing you have to peers, for they at least understand the machine you have become. They speak to you in the language of diagnostics and system checks, discuss the minutiae of your sarcophagus's operation with professional precision. In those conversations, you are not a revered ancient or a walking shrine. You are simply a complex piece of equipment that requires careful maintenance. And there is something almost comforting in that, in being treated as a machine rather than a monument. But even that connection is limited. The tech marines can tend to your physical systems, can ensure that your life support functions properly and your weapons remain operational. But they cannot address the deeper isolation, the psychological and spiritual loneliness that comes from being the last of your kind. They can keep you functional, but they cannot make you any less alone. At night, during the quiet hours when the fortress monastery's activity diminishes and most of the chapter rests, you sometimes try to reach out through the network. It is a futile gesture, for you know the other sarcophagi are empty, but some deep part of your consciousness, some fragment of what you were before entombment, refuses to accept the reality of being truly alone. And so you send queries into the darkness, call out to ancients who will never answer, search for presences that no longer exist. The silence that greets these attempts is crushing. It is not merely the absence of response, but the profound emptiness of a network designed for community now occupied by a single consciousness. You are shouting into a void that echoes nothing back, reaching out to find only your own presence reflected in systems that were meant to connect many. The isolation breeds strange thoughts, ideas that would have seemed insane during your first life as a flesh and blood warrior. You begin to wonder if you are the last dreadnought, not just in your chapter, but in existence. Perhaps every chapter has suffered the same decline, the same attrition of their ancient warriors. Perhaps across the galaxy, there are empty sacred halls and silent networks, monuments to warriors who finally found the peace of death, while you alone continue to endure. You know this cannot be true. The chapter receives communications from other chapters, coordinates actions with neighboring forces. Reports mention dreadnoughts deployed by other forces, ancient warriors still serving their chapters. But in the darkness of stasis sleep, when consciousness fragments and dreams become indistinguishable from waking thoughts, it is easy to believe that you are utterly alone, that no one in the galaxy truly understands what you endure. This isolation magnifies every other burden you carry. The weight of memory becomes heavier when there is no one to share it with. The responsibility of preserving the chapter's history feels more crushing when you are the sole repository. The horror of your mechanical existence becomes more acute when there are no peers who can validate that existence, who can confirm that you are not simply going mad, that the degradation you experience is real and not imagined. And so you endure, alone in the sacred halls, alone in the network, alone in a way that even isolation in a dreadnought sarcophagus was never meant to create. You are the last ancient, and that makes you the most isolated being in a galaxy filled with countless forms of loneliness. You exist in a cage within a cage, imprisoned in a mechanical body, and imprisoned in solitude, with no hope of escape except the final death that claimed all the others who once stood vigil beside you. The question that cannot be answered. There comes a moment, during one of your rare periods of wakefulness between battles, when you allow yourself to contemplate a question that you have been avoiding for centuries. Should you seek death? Not in battle, not in service to the chapter, but deliberately, intentionally. Should you allow your systems to fail? Should you request that the Tech Marines disable your life support? Should you find some way to end this existence that has become more burden than purpose, more torment than service? The thought is heretical by every measure that defines a Space Marine. You are a warrior of the Adeptus Astartes, genetically engineered and psychologically conditioned to know no fear and to serve until death claims you. Seeking death, choosing to abandon your duty, would be the ultimate betrayal of everything you were created to be. And yet, as you stand in these sacred halls, surrounded by the monuments to ancients who at least found peace in destruction, the question persists with uncomfortable intensity. What is the purpose of your continued existence? You ask yourself this question with the same analytical rigor you apply to tactical problems, examining the evidence from every angle. You serve the chapter, certainly. Your combat capabilities remain formidable, your tactical wisdom valuable, your presence inspiring to the battle brothers who fight alongside you. But is that enough to justify the continuation of an existence that has become defined by suffering and isolation? The chapter would survive your death. It would lose its last dreadnought, yes, and that loss would be significant. But the chapter is dying anyway, slowly bled dry by combat losses and gene seed degradation. Your presence has not arrested that decline. Your wisdom has not provided solutions to problems that have no solutions. Your combat prowess has won battles, but not prevented the overall trajectory toward extinction. In the cold calculus of necessity, the chapter could continue without you. But what would be lost is not merely tactical capability or historical knowledge. It is something more fundamental, the last living connection to the chapter's founding ideals, the final witness to battles that shaped the chapter's identity, the sole repository of traditions that will die when you die. Your death would sever the chapter's connection to its past in a way that no other loss could replicate. And that, perhaps, is the strongest argument against seeking the peace of oblivion. You consider the alternatives. Perhaps there is a way to preserve what you know without continuing to endure this existence. The chapter's librarians have recorded thousands of hours of your testimony, archived your tactical analyses and historical accounts with meticulous care. The Tech Marines have made complete copies of your databanks, preserving your memories in formats that can be accessed by future generations. In theory, everything essential about your knowledge could survive your death, could continue to serve the chapter even after you are gone. But you know this is a comforting lie. The archives cannot capture the context that makes knowledge meaningful, the subtle understanding that comes from having actually lived through the events described. The databanks preserve facts, but not wisdom, information, but not insight. What makes your contribution valuable is not merely what you know, but how you know it. The accumulated experience that allows you to see patterns and connections that pure data cannot reveal. And that cannot be preserved in any archive or recording. It exists only in your consciousness, and it will die with you when you die. So perhaps you have a duty to continue, not because your existence is pleasant or fulfilling, but because what you preserve cannot be preserved in any other way. The chapter needs you not as a warrior, but as a living archive, a consciousness that bridges past and present in ways that no amount of recorded data can replicate. And if that is your purpose, then seeking death would be abandoning that purpose, betraying the trust of every battle brother who looks to you for guidance and connection to the chapter's heritage. But this reasoning brings its own torture. It means accepting that you must endure indefinitely, that there is no end to your suffering except complete destruction in battle. It means acknowledging that you are condemned to this existence for as long as your biological components can be sustained, potentially centuries or millennia more. And it means recognizing that your value lies not in what you do, but in what you remember, that you have become more museum piece than warrior, more relic than brother. The question becomes even more complicated when you consider what will happen to the chapter if you fall in battle. Without you, they lose their last connection to the past. But if you are held in reserve to preserve that connection, then you are not fulfilling the warrior's purpose for which you were originally created. You exist in a state of impossible contradiction, too valuable to risk, too essential to preserve unused. Either choice seems to betray some fundamental aspect of what you are supposed to be. You think about the other ancients who fell before you. Did they ever contemplate this question? Did ancient Cassius, in the moments before the tyrannid bioacid breached her sarcophagus, feel relief that her service was finally ending? Did Brother Matthias, crushed beneath the debris of the fortress monastery he died defending, welcome the darkness that came after millennia of mechanical half-life? You will never know. They left no records of such thoughts, maintained no journals of their inner struggles. They served, and they fell, and they passed into the chapter's history with their doubts and fears unspoken. But you are the last, and perhaps that grants you a certain freedom to acknowledge what others could not. You are alone with your thoughts in a way the other ancients never were, isolated from any peer who might judge you for admitting weakness or questioning the virtue of endless service. And in that isolation, you can be honest with yourself about the horror of your existence in ways that might have been impossible when others depended on you to model strength and endurance. The truth is that you do not want to continue. You are tired in ways that go beyond physical or even mental exhaustion. You are tired of waking to darkness, tired of fighting battles that change nothing fundamental about the chapter's decline, tired of being revered by warriors who cannot understand what they are revering. You are tired of being alone, tired of remembering when everyone else forgets, tired of enduring when everyone else you knew has found rest. But you also cannot choose to stop, because that would be giving up, and Space Marines do not give up, because the chapter still needs you, however marginally, however temporarily, because there is a chance, however slim, that your continued service might make a difference, might help the chapter survive its current crisis and eventually rebuild. And because, fundamentally, you are still a warrior, and warriors do not choose when their service ends. They serve until death claims them, and anything less is dereliction of duty. And so the question remains unanswered. You cannot bring yourself to seek death, but you cannot find peace in continued existence. You are trapped between two equally impossible choices, condemned to endure an existence you do not want, because the alternative would be abandoning a duty you cannot relinquish. This is perhaps the cruelest aspect of being the last ancient. You must continue even when continuation has lost all meaning, except the bare fact of duty itself. When the last ancient falls, there will come a day when you do not rise from the battlefield. It is inevitable, written into the mathematics of warfare as surely as the trajectories of artillery shells or the mathematics of gene seed degradation. No armor is impenetrable. No warrior is invincible. And you, despite millennia of survival, despite all your experience and all your chapter's care in deploying you, will eventually meet an enemy that can destroy even a dreadnought. Perhaps it will be a melter weapon that breaches your sarcophagus, cooking the amniotic fluids that sustain you and killing you before the tech marines can attempt extraction. Perhaps it will be a Chaos Titan's volcano cannon, the apocalyptic weapon reducing you to superheated vapor in a fraction of a second. Perhaps it will be something more prosaic, a lucky shot from a lascannon that severs a critical power coupling, or a concentrated barrage that finally overwhelms even adamantium armor through sheer volume of fire. However it happens, whenever it happens, your death will mark the end of something that cannot be replaced. The chapter will recover what it can of your remains for proper burial rites. The tech marines will salvage components from your shattered frame for use in maintaining other equipment. The chaplains will speak the prayers for the honored dead, will add your name to the rolls of those who gave everything in service to the Emperor. But everyone present will understand that this is not just the death of another warrior. This is the end of an era, the severing of the chapter's last living connection to its founding and its glory. The sacred halls will stand empty after you fall. The other sarcophagi will remain as monuments, yes, but there will be no more awakening ceremonies in that place. The rituals the tech marines have performed for millennia, the anointing with sacred oils, and the whispered prayers to machine spirits will continue out of tradition. But they will be hollow gestures, performances of forms that have lost their substance. The halls were meant to house living warriors resting between battles, not merely to serve as a mausoleum for ancient equipment. The chapter's battle brothers will feel your absence acutely, though perhaps not in ways they can fully articulate. The young warriors who look to you for guidance will have to navigate difficult tactical situations without access to your accumulated wisdom. The chaplains who sought your insights into the chapter's traditions will have to rely on fragmentary records and their own interpretations. The chapter master, who could always depend on you to provide historical context for current crises, will have to make decisions without that perspective. But the most profound impact will be on the chapter's sense of identity. You were the living embodiment of everything the chapter had been, the walking proof that its traditions and values had endured across millennia of warfare. When battle brothers needed to remember why they fought or what their chapter stood for, they could look to you and see those ideals made manifest. Your presence assured them that the chapter had survived worse crises than whatever they currently faced, that the brotherhood they served was part of something larger and more enduring than any individual warrior or generation. When you fall, that assurance dies with you. The chapter will continue, certainly, as long as it has gene seed and warriors to carry it, but it will be diminished in ways that go beyond the mere loss of combat capability. It will become unmoored from its past, cut adrift from the traditions and memories that once defined it. The battle brothers will still fight with courage and honor, but they will do so without fully understanding why those virtues matter, without the deep connection to history that made their service meaningful beyond the immediate tactical objectives. The fortress monastery will change after your death. The sacred halls will be sealed, perhaps, preserved as a historical site, but no longer maintained as functional space. The resources dedicated to maintaining dreadnought systems will be redirected to other purposes. The entire infrastructure built around supporting and deploying ancient warriors will become obsolete overnight, and the chapter will have to adapt to a new reality where it has no living connection to its past beyond written records and oral traditions that grow more simplified with each retelling. Other chapters will hear of your death, and some will mark it with their own ceremonies of remembrance. The Space Wolves might pour a drink in your honor, acknowledging a fellow ancient who finally found rest after millennia of service. The Ultramarines might update their own records, noting that one more chapter has lost its last connection to the age of founding. The Blood Angels, who understand better than most what it means to be haunted by the past, might offer prayers for your soul and for the chapter you left behind. But these gestures, however well meant, cannot change the fundamental reality. Your death creates a void that nothing can fill. The chapter will survive in some form, but it will never again be what it was when you stood vigil in the sacred halls. It will become something else, something newer, and perhaps more adapted to the realities of the current age. But it will have lost the weight of history, the deep connection to tradition, the living memory that you provided. And what of you? What happens to a consciousness that has existed for millennia when death finally claims it? Do you find the peace that was denied you during your mechanical existence? Do you join the Emperor in whatever lies beyond death? Or do you simply cease to exist, your consciousness extinguished like a candle flame? These questions have no answers, can have no answers until the moment arrives. But they are questions you have contemplated during the long periods of darkness between battles, wondering if death will bring relief, or merely another form of existence that you cannot escape. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of your eventual death is that it will be both desperately mourned and profoundly welcomed. The chapter will grieve losing its last ancient, will feel that loss for generations to come. But part of that grief will be tinged with relief that you finally found the rest that was denied you for so long. The battle brothers who knew you will be glad, in a way they cannot openly express, that you no longer have to endure the torment of mechanical existence. They will mourn you while simultaneously being grateful that your suffering has ended. And you, in those final moments when systems fail and consciousness begins to fragment, might feel something similar. Grief at leaving the chapter you have served for so long, regret for all the knowledge that will die with you, sorrow at the thought of your battle brothers facing the future without your guidance, but also relief. Relief that the burden is finally being lifted, that the endless cycle of darkness and battle and darkness again is coming to an end. Relief that you will no longer have to watch the chapter's slow decline, no longer have to carry the weight of memories that no one else shares. When the last ancient falls, a chapter loses more than a warrior. It loses its history, its living connection to everything it was meant to be. And that loss, that severing of the link between past and present, is a wound that can never fully heal. The chapter will continue, must continue, for that is what Space Marines do. But it will do so with a piece of its soul forever missing, a void where the last ancient once stood vigil in the sacred halls that have now fallen silent. Lessons from the brink. The Imperium has existed for 10,000 years, and in that vast span of time, countless Space Marine chapters have faced near extinction. Some have recovered, rebuilt from the edge of destruction to serve again. Others have faded into history, their names remembered only in fragmentary records or not at all. As the last ancient in your chapter, you carry the memory of several such crises, have witnessed other chapters struggle with the same decline your chapter now faces. The Crimson Castellans nearly died during the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium. An orc invasion of unprecedented scale devastated their recruiting worlds and destroyed most of their fortress monastery. When the war ended, the chapter could field fewer than 200 battle brothers, and its gene seed reserves were critically depleted. But the Castellans survived through a combination of careful husbandry of resources and willingness to accept help from their successors. They spent 3 centuries rebuilding, accepting gene seed from related chapters and recruits from worlds that had once supplied their progenitors. The Castellans exist to this day, though much changed from what they were before the war. The scythes of the Emperor faced destruction by Hive Fleet Kraken. The Tyrannid invasion consumed their home world and killed nearly every battle brother in the chapter. The survivors, numbering fewer than 100 warriors, became a fleet-based chapter, conducting hit-and-run raids against the Tyrannid swarm while desperately trying to maintain enough gene seed to rebuild. It took them nearly 2 centuries, and they never fully recovered their original strength. But they endured, adapted, and continue to fight in the Emperor's name. The Lamenters have faced extinction multiple times across their cursed history. Gene seed defects, catastrophic battles, and simple bad luck have reduced them to chapter strength so low they should have been declared dead. But somehow, through sheer stubbornness and perhaps divine intervention, they continue to exist. Their numbers never reach full strength, and their gene seed remains flawed, but they refuse to give up, refuse to accept that their chapter's story has ended. These examples offer lessons, though not all of them are applicable to your chapter's current situation. The most important lesson is that survival requires flexibility, a willingness to adapt traditions and accept help even when pride suggests otherwise. Chapters that rigidly adhere to their founding practices in the face of extinction tend to die. Chapters that can evolve, that can accept recruits from non-traditional sources or gene seed from related chapters or operational doctrines that differ from their founder's vision, those chapters can survive even catastrophic losses. But there is tension between adaptation and preservation of identity. If a chapter changes too much in the name of survival, does it remain the same chapter? If the Crimson Castellans accepted so much gene seed from other sources that their genetic heritage became diluted, are they truly the same chapter that fought at the War of the Beast? If the Scythes of the Emperor abandoned their traditional recruitment practices and their connection to their lost home world, would they still be the Scythes, or merely a chapter that borrowed the name? This is the question your chapter faces now. To survive, it must change. It must accept that the old ways, the traditions that sustained it for millennia, may no longer be viable. It must be willing to recruit from worlds that do not match the traditional profile. It must consider accepting gene seed from related chapters or even petitioning Mars for resources from the original Legion stock. It must adapt its combat doctrine, reduced numbers and limited resources. But making these changes feels like betrayal to warriors who have been taught that the chapter's tradition